Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are joining us this evening at this moment, welcome to the Times Litfest 2017. This is the third edition of Delhi's favorite festival of ideas. The Times Litfest is brought to you by Rajnigandha, Clean Energy Partner Gale, Education Partner Rao Study Circle, and Knowledge Partner Pearl Academy. This particular venue is also brought to you by Pearl Academy. For the next session, we have with us Manu Joseph and Tishani Doshi. The session is titled Poetry Reading, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. Tishani Doshi in conversation with Manu Joseph. Can we hear a big round of applause for both of them, please? Tishani Doshi publishes novels, essays, and poetry. She has worked as a dancer with the Chandralekha troupe for 15 years. She lives on a beach in Tamil Nadu. She will be in conversation with Manu Joseph. Manu is the author of Miss Leila, Armed and Dangerous, which was released in September, and the widely acclaimed and best-selling novels Serious Men and The Illicit Happiness of Other People, which have been translated into many languages and have been nominated for several prizes. Among other honors, he is the winner of the Hindu Literature Prize and the American Pen Open Book Award. Over to Manu for this interesting session.
Yeah. So I don't know what's wrong with you people for coming here. I think in case you didn't know, there's a Kamal Hassan session which is going on, and then there's someone else. Who? Okay. I'm so happy I don't know who that is. We'll have only one rule for the session. We're not going to let you go. So you just can't leave. But I also like this size. It's kind of intimate. We were trying to get the chairs close to you, but that didn't work. And we tried to get you close to us. That also didn't work. There are more people trickling in, which is excellent. Amrita, you can't leave. That's the only thing. So I'm very happy to be here chatting with Tishani Doshi, one of the Indian writers I greatly admire for her poetry and her prose and journalism. You're able to hear me, right? Okay. I usually get along only with happy people who I'm able to understand. As a result, I get along with very few poets. And I get along with Tishani unless she's really hiding something very, very dark and nutty inside her. When I admire the poetry which comes out of that, but I find it very hard to get along with most poets because I've been diagnosed with a condition which is extreme happiness. In any kind of a situation, I get disoriented by a certain celebration of suffering. Now, actually what I'm trying to drive at is that one of the intellectual problems I had, which we will discuss as we talk to Tishani, is as a writer, I have felt that there's always a contest between logic, and there is logic in writing, and it is the most underrated aspect of writing, especially prose. But there is also a certain beauty in lament, and then of course there's a lot of things in between. But when I was young and trying to understand poetry, we all start off by writing poems. I especially started off with bad poems. There is a lot of respect given to lament, while many of us go through life being told that you have to be very strong. Spit on your hands, slap your thighs, stand akimbo, and face the world. But then when you're reading literature, when you're reading art, it is the opposite, that there is a certain celebration of weakness. I want to ask you, Tishani, do you agree with what I just said?
You said a celebration of
frailties or weaknesses?
frailties. I don't see it like that. I see I don't see it so divided, I suppose. I see the creation of writing, whether it's prose or poetry, taken from life, so emotions, and then converted into something else. So I don't think that it's a celebration of lament or frailties or even loss, even though when you write it, it could be that you're coming from a place of loss. And certainly a lot of my poems begin in that kind of dark place. I mean, I think I was saying the other day that I try to write a happy poem. And in fact, I was even commissioned to write a poem for something of the UN where they celebrate the International Day of Happiness, which there is one, by the way. And I began writing the poem, and it turned into something darker than I expected. So, but I am a very happy person.
No, this is exactly
Otherwise,
what
we
I'm
wouldn't
talking
get
about.
along, right?
This is exactly what I'm talking about. What is the problem with happiness and poetry? I mean, why can't you write a happy? Why is it difficult to write a happy poem? I can write a happy novel. I've not done it yet, but
I think happiness is a banal emotion. I don't think happiness is interesting. I think joy is interesting. I think ecstasy is interesting. Happiness, you know, it's enshrined in the Constitution of America, whatever, the pursuit of happiness. I don't see happiness as a great pursuit. I see the pursuit of beauty, the pursuit of love, the pursuit of other things as a higher thing. Happiness is, it happens from time to time, and it's good.
but just that you keep literature out of that boring thing which
Literature
Bhutan
doesn't come
has.
from that. I don't think it arrives from that. I don't think, at least for me.
Another issue is, as I mentioned, the element of logic. Like, for example, when I read Emily Dickinson's highly wanted lines, I could not stop for death, so he kindly stopped for me. I thought, what the hell? You know, what nonsense is this? Yeah, everybody dies. And you may say, yeah, I do accept it's a semi-literate reading of that line, but I refuse to be moved by a line which either states the obvious or it exaggerates the ordinary, where the whole logic collapses. At the same time, I can see the beauty of logic in, I measured out my life in coffee spoons, which is, I think, this is a triumph of poetry. Only poetry can do that. And in the heart of it is that the metaphor does not destroy any logic. And I do feel that though Tishani has a broad appreciation of poetry, which is not always. I mean, some of the poetry that she has quoted, at least on a Facebook page, I've had problems with. For example, E. Cummings. Would you be able to? You know the line that you quoted, right? Which is, for whatever. I can understand my own handwriting.
For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it is always ourselves that we find by the sea.
By the sea.
In the sea.
In the sea, yeah. So, what does it mean?
You have to read the whole poem. It's called Maggie and Millie and Molly and May, and it's about how they go to the seaside and they find different things like a creature and a starfish, and one picks up a stone, and it's about
But that's
how,
like life. You see yourself.
yeah,
in
it's about
almost
how
every-
you are alone and how the sea is the thing that you find yourself in. So that's the poem's, that's how I understand that particular poem, yeah.
But you yourself have exquisite logic in your poetry, which is one of the reasons I really like. I see a lot of literary strength in your poem. For example, in the poem, How to Be Happy in 101 Days. By the way, she has written about happiness. In fact, the title says, How to Be Happy in... Are you able to hear me? Yeah. How to Be Happy in 101 Days. Look for utilitarian values of violence. Use the knife lustily to peel the mango's jealous skin. I'm just quoting in bits and parts, okay? Renounce your house. Take just one object with you. Slip it in your pocket. On the 99th day, you must surrender the object. But until then, feel free to attach sentiment to it. Set out into the world and prepare to be horrified. do not close your eyes. I find that very beautiful. If you're attacked, spread your legs and say, brother, why are you doing this to me? And there is this ode to Patrick Swayze. At 14, I wanted to devour you. I mean, she's saying it, okay, so kind of just imagine Tishani saying it. The twang, the strut, the perfect proletarian butt in the black pants of you. So you were objectifying Patrick Swayze. So can you tell us something about that experience? Unless this was not autobiographical.
No, no, it's very autobiographical. I had for many years a poster of Patrick Swayze in my room. I watched Dirty Dancing about 35 times. I know every line in that movie, every song, every move. And it was my dream that growing up in Madras, I would meet my own Johnny, you know. His name is Johnny in the film, by the way.
Okay.
So, and that you would get swept up in this kind of romance because he's a good guy, even though everybody thinks he's bad, you know. I think when you're a 14-year-old girl, you have incredible desires and incredible hormones, and the idea of love and the idea of escaping yourself is so strong. I can't barely remember it now because 14 is so very long ago, but I still have that sense of deep hunger to arrive in your life where you are somehow more grown up and not 14, you know? And I think a lot of 14-year-old girls I know are desperate to grow up, and obviously for me it's a kind of thing of, you know, the poem, I wrote it much, much later. But
So when did you write the poem
very
first?
recently, I found my Dirty Dancing soundtrack after many years, and I was driving to the beach, and all these songs, you know, came, and I thought, gosh, that was my life, and it feels so long ago. And I was thinking about the fact that Patrick Swayze had suffered from pancreatic cancer, and this beautiful man with this beautiful body who could dance so beautifully was dead, and he had suffered and gone. And I thought about, you know, the whole book actually is a contemplation on mortality and the fact of our own bodies moving towards that, but also needing to celebrate the beauty along the way, you know. So that's kind of what the poem is hoping to do, I think.
Well, talking about body and the autobiographical nature of poetry, one of your poems is called Your Body Language is Not Indian. Now, I believe that someone actually told you this.
Yes.
Your body language is not Indian, Tishani. So how did you respond to that? It was a Bharatanatyam dancer who told you this?
No, the Bharatanatyam dancer was added because the Bharatanatyam dancer represents a kind of traditional perspective for me. I worked for many years with Chandralekha, who was a very, you know, into bringing in yoga and Bharatanatyam and Kalaripayat. So very much moving away from tradition and going into a contemporary expression. And I met someone at a gathering who, when I told her I was a dancer, said, oh, but your body language is not Indian. And I was very offended by that because I felt that it was an attack of some kind of on my authenticity or my my sort of place in life, you know, because she was basically rejecting that and saying, no, I don't believe it. And I thought, after having worked for so many years in this piece, which is embodying, in fact, very much a very Indian, not just language, but also idea, I thought I was quite pissed off, actually. But I wasn't able to, like in those situations when you are faced by that, you never come up with something quick enough. So I don't remember. I think I didn't say anything. But
So
I wrote a poem. So there is a good thing about poetry is that you can get your revenge by writing a poem eventually.
It's a form of violence sometimes, like humor.
Yes, absolutely. Because also you have to, the other thing is, why did I get offended by it? I got offended by it because, in fact, I have always felt like an outsider because, in fact, I am only half Indian. So there is a nugget of of my own self-defense mechanism there. But I felt like I've lived in Madras all my life, but because of the way I look or something which seems to you not entirely Indian, that then I cannot embody that idea of Indian. So it was that little thing that can happen, but it's always your own neuroses, your own paranoia, your own fears, your own securities that you react to when someone says a very passing statement, you know. Somebody could say something totally else which you might get offended at, and I would be fine with it, for instance. Yeah.
Literature and journalism are the only two fields, I think, apart from Jesuit priests, where they talk about being moral all the time, but it's almost not filled with, but there are a lot of jokes. And they talk about how writing is a moral act. But when you get to know some of the writers, if not all, you're not so convinced, and then you get very disappointed. In fact, if you get to know some of the writers, you won't be able to read them. But what I want to ask you, Tishani, especially poetry, because it is very pure, pure form of art. It can be impure, but should a poet be a good person to write good poetry?
So I spent the last year reading biographies of writers, not just poets, but so the biography of Rimbaud, the biography of D.H. Lawrence, the biography of Virginia Woolf, the biography of Dickens, the biography of Tolstoy. And I'm fascinated with writers' lives because I do think that the relationship between what you live and what you make with your work is very close, and that we do take from life. And but I don't agree at all with the idea that we have to be good people, because none of the poets I know and admire, I think they were all complete reprobates. You know, if you think of Rimbaud and Verlaine and Baudelaire, and they were all just tearing up the town and robbing people and stabbing people and writing poetry in the middle of it. And I think now we're in a very sort of a phase where our writers are quite respectable, and we do long distance running, and we watch our diets, and we're very moderate, and we say the right things. But I don't think that that's a prerequisite for art. I think the life has to be seen differently, and the work has to be judged differently. And it would be wonderful if writers were also good people, but I think it's rare.
If any of your literary heroes it turned out was a rapist or a sexual harasser, what happens to his art in your perception? Would you stop reading him?
No, but it would affect the way I thought about him. We were talking about Louis C.K., who I admire as a comedian, and I found him very funny, and I liked what he said about, men and women also, except that I thought that his jokes, masturbation jokes, went on slightly too long. Now I know why. But there's this sense of disappointment, I suppose, but I still think that the really good work can be kept separately from it. Naipaul, I mean, not that I admire all of Naipaul's work, but there are some books of Naipaul which are beautiful. And when you read Patrick French's biography about him, you think, what a horrible, I mean, he comes off really quite harsh,
Yes.
you know, particularly the way that he treated his wife,
Yes.
who supported him throughout his career, and was the day she died, he installed the next, the next day, the next wife. So it's not an easy relationship.
Is reading a process of ignorance? At least as far as, if you know everything about the writing process, would you still find beauty in what you've read?
It's difficult. I mean, I think we used to read books in a sense of not knowing anything about the author, and that we could just have this very pure, like you said, relationship with the book and with the language that we're reading. But I don't think that that happens anymore, because now we are living in this very connected world, and we know so much about each other. Our idea of privacy is completely changed. So we also share so much of our lives and ourselves, not just through the writing, but also in general, social media or whatever. So I don't know. I still would imagine that if there's something in a work of art, It is that at that point there is some anonymity and some suspension of belief, and that when you are reading a book, it ceases to matter who wrote it or how it came to be, just that you are having that moment with the book or the film or the painting, and that is the pure relation. The pure relation is not even the writing of it. I don't think there's anything pure about writing, because I think you're digging and stealing and borrowing and using everything that you have to make something. But the pure relationship is that between the reader and the book. And then you can arrive in a place maybe where everything else recedes, including horrible things about the person that you might know.
Sarita, I feel the most pure relationship I have is with science non-fiction, because I'm a lay person and I'm not arguing with the book. If it's a novel, I have so many, I feel that this is either not good or not stylish enough, or this is far-fetched. Similarly, are you able to read other people's poetry easily, especially your contemporaries who are very good?
Yeah, I mean, it's to do with taste. So there are poets that I admire and I read obsessively. There are poets whom I've loved at different points in my life, and I don't necessarily return to them because they don't last. Some of them do. So there are like the classics, the greatest hits. You go back again and again to those poems. And then there are the contemporaries, which I feel in the world of poetry, it's a large and generous pool, and it can be. So, but it's a question of finding the voice that you like and that you relate to, and that you... Actually, the poems that I love to read are the poems that make me want to go and write my own poem.
That's interesting. You're half Gujarati.
Yeah.
Your father likes Narendra Modi?
I think he began thinking that he was okay, and then he
Did you
changed
ever
his
have
mind.
arguments with him at home?
No.
Over how can you kind of...
No, because we are politically on the same line. We don't live in Gujarat, so therefore he's actually more Madrasi than Gujarati,
Okay.
as I am.
Okay. You use the word Madras. You don't say Chennai, right? Is it part of your certain literary way of perceiving the world that you kind of retaining? And I try to I also try to hold out, but it didn't last. But you are.
I sometimes say the word Chennai. It comes out because I hear it so much. But it's really a question of aesthetics for me. It's not a political thing. I just like the word Madras. I think it's a very beautiful sounding name. For me, Madras recollects certain things like the Madras check, the Madras, the... What else? Not the Madras curry, because that's not
Madras
true.
Club.
But it's just a name that evokes that town that I was born and grew up in, which is that city by the sea, and that had this kind of weird port city comings and goings, but not in a way that Bombay does. And so Madras was always this city. And Chennai to me is much more industrial, it's much more advanced. You know, we have malls and IT corridors, and I don't associate that with Madras. So it's a romantic choice. I associate Madras with childhood and with that particular thing, that dreamy, slow-paced city, which it no longer is. So it's kind of being nostalgic, I guess, on some level.
All right. You know, actually, you can hide behind words and do journalism. You can write journalistic pieces without revealing yourself, or masquerading as a noble person. You can actually even write novels hiding behind words and hiding behind characters. Can you hide and write poetry? Or do you have to always reveal everything about yourself in a particular context?
What do you mean by hide? I don't understand.
Like, for example, even in a novel, you don't have to reveal your deeper thoughts or on whose side you are. You have characters projecting your views. And you can hide very easily behind characters, behind descriptions, behind political correctness, behind smart lines. But there is an expectation that when a poet says something, she means everything.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I think I also, at one point when I started writing poetry, when I was in my 20s, I had the idea that it was truth. Poetry was truth, and that everything you said had to be true. in both the very basic sense, but also in a higher sense of truth. And I changed my mind on that as I went on, because I had a professor who knocked that out of me. I went to do my master's at Johns Hopkins, and we had a very snobby professor, but he did teach me one thing. I had a poem about taking my uncle's ashes and putting him in the water after he died, and I said, I hold my uncle in plastic bags. And this guy said, why uncle? Why not father? Why not husband? And I said, no, it was my uncle who died. And he said, doesn't matter. For the poem, it would be stronger because father and husband is much stronger than uncle. Uncle could be any relation. It doesn't imply a particular type of relationship. So I changed it to I hold my husband in plastic bags. And I think that was a great lesson to realize that truth is only important in terms of the extent of the emotion that you're feeling. You're feeling this emotion on someone you loved who died. And in a way, it doesn't matter to you, the reader, who doesn't know my uncle or my father or my husband, who it was. But you have your own father, or you have maybe your own husband, and you can put your own experience onto that. And that's a kind of truth which poetry deals with, and which poetry can jump to, which is very powerful. And I think in a way, we kind of have to release ourselves from the banality, the banal truth of this happened, it actually happened on a Tuesday, it was this, to get out of that and say, I am hurting, or I am shocked, or I am trying to understand what to do with this grief. And that's what you use for the poem, and that's what makes the poem. And that's true. So then it doesn't matter what the truth was actually at the end of it, because you've made the poem, and the poem is what lasts.
So what is it about you we will never learn from your poems?
I'm not going to tell you that, obviously.
Huh? Is it obvious?
No, I don't know what it is that you're never going to learn, but even if I did, I wouldn't reveal it.
All right. Would you want to read one of your poems?
Sure. I'll read a short poem which is called A Fable for the 21st Century. It was about reading newspapers and feeling a kind of fatigue about how little I seem to know, because every day I would read, and then every day I would think I know less. My knowledge is not as much as I would like for it to be. And then I read a beautiful quote by this Romanian philosopher, E.M. Cioran, and he just had this sentence, existing is plagiarism. And it made me think a lot about life, and even my work as a writer. They're supposed to be only like 7 stories that you tell again and again. So why are we doing it when Homer has already done it, when Kalidas has already done it? Why the hell are we writing stories when all the themes have already been explored and written about in a beautiful way? And part of it is, I think, being human and realizing that this is the experience that we have, and we have to live it, even though every human before us has already gone through those same themes that we keep talking about, which is love and death and fear and all of that. So this is called A Fable for the 21st Century. There is no end to unknowing. We read papers, wrap fish in yesterday's news, spread squares on the floor so puppy can pee on Putin's face. Even the mountains cannot say what killed the Sumerians all those years ago. And as such, you should know that blindness is historical, that nothing in this poem will make you thinner, richer, or smarter. Myself, I couldn't say how a light bulb worked, but if we threw you head first into the past, what would you say about the secrets of chlorophyll? How would you expound on the aggression of sea anemones, the battle of Plassey, Boko Haram? Language is a peculiar destiny. Once, at the desert's edge, a circle of pilgrims spoke of wonder, their lives dark with mud and hose. They didn't know you could make perfume from rain, that human blood was more fattening than beer. But their fears were ripe and lucent, their clods of children plentiful, and God walked among them, knitting sweaters for injured chevaliers. Will you tell them how everything that's been said is worth saying again? How the body is helicoidal, spiriting on and on? How it is only ever through the will of nose, bronchiole, trachea, lung, that breath outpaces any sadness of tongue. Thank you.
So that's the way to read a poem, and that's why I decided not to read a complete poem. So nothing in this poem will make you thinner, richer, or smarter. So I think it's a dig at a takeaway culture that is, like people read a book and say that what is the takeaway? And everything has become self-help, including books that don't call themselves self-help. But people feel time is an investment and they should take something out of it. How do you view yourself in an age where people read books for something called takeaway? Is that the expression takeaway? What's the takeaway? So, is it a dig at...
It is, of course it is, because everything that I do is completely outside of this sphere. So I'm like a dinosaur, or something that's about to die. I refer in the book many times to poets as a species that are really struggling to make themselves relevant in today's world. I feel like poetry should be the most available of all the literary arts because it's short and it's immediate and it can speak directly to you. But in fact, there was this beautiful thing that this American poet Charles Simic said. He said, and secretly all poets want to do is to stop time. And in fact, even though a poem is very short, you have to arrive in a different speed to read it and to understand it. Whereas with fiction, you're moving in a way that's going outward. And in poetry, it's demanding you to narrow and to focus and to distill and to arrive at that point at the end. So it's a very difficult thing, actually. And I think that I feel that poetry has been such a huge thing in my life, and I call myself sometimes a poetry evangelist because I will go and read to 2 people in a library in Edinburgh, and if there's only 2 people, I'll read to them. Or I'll read to 200 or 50 or 10 or whatever, because I'm shameless, in fact, because I think that poetry is important and that it can do things that other things can't. And its strength comes from this ability to condense and to really distill something about the human experience. And so when I put the TV on, or when I open the newspapers, or when I just listen to what people are obsessing about, I feel like, what are they talking about? What does this mean? Is this really important? And of course there's a tone of self-righteous which I catch myself, because obviously I think that this is like the most important thing, and I realize that, oh, maybe 0.2% of the entire population even know what poetry is or care about it. And so, yeah, it's about trying to find a kind of relevance and trying to shake people up and say that,
we exist.
Yes, we have existed, we exist. Let's look back, let's look forward, and where are we going, So cricket and this and that. I love popular culture. It's not like I can't relate at all to it. I get it. But I think there should be a space for something that is a little bit more, that requires a little bit more work.
How much time do we have? Excuse me. Hi, how much time do we have? We have 15 minutes more. Sorry?
15 to 20.
And that includes the audience questioning? Okay, fine. So, the process is also very self-absorbed.
Yes.
I feel it's an intellectual version of taking a selfie. Do you?
That's one way of looking at it. In fact, there's a poet I know who's done a whole book of self-portrait as X, Y, Z, self-portrait as a Wikipedia entry, self-portrait as a, and you're right, it is. Except that, writing a poem requires more work than taking a selfie. But it is an examination of what are you and how do you relate to the outside in a way. One version of poetry, not all poetry though.
How long do you take to write a poem? Say the poem that you've just read out, the fable.
That poem, I had the idea in my head for years, and it was only until I read that. I was staying at a friend's house in a little cottage in Mashobra, and they had a wonderful library of books, and I discovered this E.M. Choran. And then I read that existing is plagiarism, and it kind of unlocked for me the block, because I knew I wanted to talk about this sense of this catch-up that we are playing with knowledge. Even though we live in an age of information, we are going very wide rather than going deep. So it's like, how do we counter that? So that took years, and then other poems get written in a morning. So it's very varied, yeah.
Okay. My last question, I have an indecent question to ask.
Oh dear.
I'm an indecent person.
That's right, you
So,
are.
as you can see, I'm a very beautiful person.
Yeah.
And because I'm gorgeous, doors open and all kinds of things happen.
Yeah.
And some people hate you also. Does it happen to you?
Are you saying that I'm beautiful, Manu? That's nice, thank you. I think I said something about the pursuit of beauty before. That was more in a sort of abstract way. I have a poem in the book called "Oh Great Beauties," and it's about going around in museums. I was doing a poetry tour in England some years ago, and I was looking at these portraits of the women who were presumably the beauties of their time. And I noticed that not a single one of them ever showed their teeth. They were all very serious, and I never saw teeth, and I thought that's so weird because, why aren't they showing their teeth? And the poem begins with that, and it ends with a scene of witches at the outer edges of the town. And I think what it means in context with the idea of beauty is that I am not interested in beauty that is just beautiful, but I am interested in a ferocity in beauty. And that's why that idea of the witches that are somewhat dangerous, that's beautiful to me. And so I would hope that in my own life and in my own way, that would be the kind of beauty that I'm dealing with. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know if that answers your
No.
question. That's okay.
I was trying to ask you about the consequences, but then we'll let it be, and we'll open the house to questions. So, yeah, no opinions masquerading as questions.
Yeah, good evening. My question is that when someone transcends the physical dimension of life in some way, if you have maybe some spiritual experience, you cannot but articulate it in poetry. Prose cannot do it. So has such a dimension touched your life? There are mystics, whether it was Kabir or a contemporary mystic called Sadhguru, everyone, they take to poetry when they have to express mysticism. So can you talk about that? Mysticism and poetry.
The idea of spirituality is very interesting. I think for me, I think that my experience in that sense would have been my experience as a dancer. And because I very much relate the body to the spiritual. I don't see it as a separate compartment. And part of that is because I worked with someone like Chandralekha, who always insisted that spirituality and sensuality were together in the body. And in fact, when I began working very strongly with my body for many years, I remember having experiences which I had not had primarily because I was using my body in a different way. And one or two of those experiences could be considered somewhat spiritual. I had a moment when I sort of shot out of bed one night, like I had been plugged in like a toaster, and I just rose out of bed. And some people said, oh, it's your Kundalini awakening, or I don't know about all that. But I think to answer your question, that idea of spirituality is also nature, you know, it's also the world around you. It's this deep sort of feeling of richness and sensuality that you drag from life. And I feel that that to me is God, you know, and that to me is spiritual. So without that experience, then the writing cannot happen. It's true. If you are detached and if you feel that like you're in a kind of barren, dry, arid state, then I feel like no creativity happens for me. So only when the world is lush and when it's beautiful and when it's, or even if it's terrifying, but you feel connected to it, that's when writing happens.
Do you, sorry, I'm eating into your time, but I have the mic. Do you respect sanity? Should we respect sanity?
I think the line is very thin between sanity and
I got the
insanity.
answer.
Okay.
Yeah, any more
You know
questions?
which side I'm on then. Okay.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Actually, my question
The
is...
mic is not working.
Can you hold it up to your...
Okay, good evening, ma'am. My question is, have you ever written anything on women, like something on women empowerment or right of women or something of that nature?
Sorry, have I ever?
Have you ever written on women's empowerment?
Have I written on women?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have. The book is called Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods.
Oh, ho, ho.
And a large part of the book has to do with the gender violence and with women coming together and with looking at the strength of women. So yes, it's very much a theme for me, and I've written about it not just in this book but in previous books as well.
Yeah.
Hello. Do you think poetry is just what is written, or even people can be living poems?
No, I think of poetry as I mean, I can extend a bit to include music and some lyrics into the realm of poetry, but I don't think I can look at a person as a living poem.
Okay, and can I have a few minutes with you after the session?
Sure.
Yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
Hi, so you wrote Girls Coming Out of Woods, and Manu wrote in a piece how that might leave some collateral damage among men.
Sorry,
what do you think about that?
can you just keep the mic from the beginning?
Yeah, so you wrote Girls Coming Out of the Woods, right? Which obviously deals with women coming out in the post-Weinstein era.
Yeah.
And then Manu wrote in a piece how women writers might be saying that, you know, some men may be collateral damage in these cases. So what do you think about that?
What did you write, Manu? Just give me a recap.
No, actually what I had said in my column was that now there is so much anger that I had asked a group of women writers, if that's an expression, what if one of these men are innocent? They said, considering all those things that have happened, it's okay. Some collateral damage is okay. So that's the context of the...
Okay.
Do you
okay.
also feel some collateral damage is okay?
I think that word is very adus. It's collateral damage is a disgusting statement in any
also
context.
filth,
It's yeah, and that was probably disgusting as well. I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I think it's a very harsh way to look at it. You know, the poem was not written post Harvey Weinstein. The poem was written much before. It was written after Jyoti Singh was raped in Delhi in 2012. and it was to do with the kind of reaction to the many stories of violence that were coming out, I mean, against women. And I had this idea that all those murdered women, all those dead women would get together somehow and emerge out of these forests, and they would be like an army of women. And it was like just a vision I had, and this idea that that there is a kind of echoing back after death, and that their lives are not gone forever, that we have to kind of remember it, and we have to also do something about it. It was also like, what do we do with this violence? For this thing of the question of what about men? I mean, I think that's a question that men have to ask also. And I don't feel like I have to answer that question, because women ask a lot of questions of themselves. And we are constantly examining why things happen to us and what can we do. And we are always questioning and examining the idea of womanhood. And I don't know that men do it enough. So actually, this is the time for men to do it. And Manu, being a man, you should be examining that. And in your next column,
I will not introspect on being a man. Okay, listen, I want Tishani to end the session with a reading. So you let me know when. Okay, so yeah.
Ma'am, what is poetry according to you? Means, is it just expression of your feelings, or collection of ideas, or that you want to show those different dimensions to the reader? Means, what is exactly poetry according to you?
It's a very good and difficult question to answer, because I don't know that I can say what makes a poem. I don't know. I only know when I read something, whether I feel it's a poem or whether it's trying to be a poem, but it's not. It's an incredibly difficult question to answer, and I think I ask myself that all the time also. Not just what is a poem, but why are we still writing poems, and what is the point of writing poems? I think on a very basic level, a poem is an expression of saying, well, you know, I exist, and here is my voice in some way. But beyond that, it's very difficult to get into the, you know, the basics of what makes a poem. I'm sure they teach it in some American university, but
I have a hypothesis.
Okay.
I think maybe the human mind wants to do something which is at once compassionate and exploitative. And it expresses itself in poetry.
Why exploitative?
Because you are exploiting very powerful emotions in you outside. Now, for example, your choice of word where you shifted from uncle to husband, it can mean something entirely different for someone.
Yes.
So you are doing it because your professor taught you the technique actually to use compassion to be exploitative. Maybe it's not a bad thing, it's just a bad word.
But I think it's not just poetry, right? It's all art, it's all creative process where you are like taking from the truth around you and making something else which is separate from that real thing. And it could be considered exploitative, but I think it's also just the way of transforming one thing into another. And why do we do it? Like, why write a novel about, you know, why write the novels that you've written, or why write the poems that I write? Because you're interested in that subject, so you're exploring it, and part of the exploration means, you know, that quality is very deceptive and hard to hold and to describe also. But that's constantly what's happening in the making of art, I think.
We have no more questions? Okay, so Tishani, do we have time for one question? No. Okay, sorry, we don't have time for more questions. Now Tishani will recite the title poem, and I'll leave you to one of the most powerful literary experiences you will ever have.
Oh, God.
I'll just step aside.
Wow, that's... So I'll end with this poem, and I'll stand if that's okay. I don't think it needs an introduction. Girls are coming out of the woods. Girls are coming out of the woods, wrapped in cloaks and hoods, carrying iron bars and candles and a multitude of scars collected on acres of premature grass and city buses in temples and bars. Girls are coming out of the woods with panties tied around their lips, making such a noise it's impossible to hear. Is the world speaking too? Is it really asking, what does it mean to give someone a proper resting? Girls are coming out of the woods, lifting their broken legs high, leaking secrets from unfastened thighs, all the lies whispered by strangers and swimming coaches and uncles, especially uncles who said spreading would be light and easy, who put bullets in their chests and fed their pretty faces to fire, who sucked the mud clean off their ribs and decorated their coffins with briar. Girls are coming out of the woods, clearing a ground to scatter their stories. Even those girls found naked in ditches and wells, those forgotten in neglected attics and buried in riverbeds like sediments from a different century. They've crawled their way out from behind the curtains of childhood, the silver pink weight of their bodies pushing against water, against the sad, feathered tarnish of remembrance. Girls are coming out of the woods the way birds arrive at morning windows, pecking and humming, until all you can hear is the smash of their minuscule hearts against glass, the bright desperation of sound, bashing, disappearing. Girls are coming out of the woods. They're coming. They're coming. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Manu. Your badge is here.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you, Tishani. Guys, can we have a huge round of applause for both Manu and Tishani once again, please? The next session at this very venue will start at 7 p.m. sharp. That's in about 15 minutes. The next session will be Shobha Day in conversation with Bachi Karkaria.